You'll report to my nephew, the CEO told the single dad. He quit, and her best division collapsed. The conference room went silent when Daniel Reed stood up, pushed his chair back, and said 4 words that nobody expected to hear. I resign effective today. Across the polished glass table, Victoria Sterling stared at him as if he had just announced that he intended to burn the entire company down. Her nephew, Ethan, sat beside her with a smug smile. Victoria was the CEO of Sterling Hart, a company worth billions and one of the most respected technology firms in the country. Daniel was the quiet man who had spent 11 years building its logistics division from a struggling department into the company's most profitable operation. He was also a single father who had learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, packed lunches, school pickups, and promises he desperately tried to keep. Victoria had just told him that all of his work, all of his authority, and all of the respect he had earned were being handed to Ethan. You'll report to my nephew from now on, she had said. Daniel looked at Ethan. Then he looked at Victoria. And instead of begging, arguing, or threatening, he simply smiled. All right. Victoria leaned back. She thought she had won. She had no idea that within 6 months, the division she considered untouchable would lose its largest clients, its best engineers, millions of dollars, and almost half its market value. And she certainly didn't know that the man she had just pushed out would become the one person capable of saving it. But before we get into what happened next, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about people who are underestimated, pushed aside, and eventually discover that their greatest strength was never the position they held. Because Daniel's story isn't really about losing a job. It's about discovering what your worth is when someone takes your title away. Daniel Reed had never been the kind of man people noticed when he entered a room. He wasn't loud. He didn't wear expensive watches. He didn't talk about his accomplishments. He drove a 9-year-old gray sedan that had a dent in the passenger door and a cracked cup holder. His suits were always clean but rarely new. And most mornings, before anyone at Sterling Hart saw him, Daniel had already lived half a day. At 5:30 every morning, his alarm went off. He would quietly get out of bed so he wouldn't wake his daughter, Lily. He would make coffee, pack her lunch, prepare his own breakfast, check her school bag, and sometimes spend 5 minutes searching for a missing shoe. Lily was 10 years old. She had dark curly hair, a habit of asking difficult questions at the worst possible time, and a heart that seemed too big for the small body carrying it. Her mother had died when Lily was 4. Daniel never spoke badly about her mother. He simply told Lily that sometimes life took people away before we were ready. On difficult nights, Lily would ask, "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" And Daniel always gave the same answer. She already was. Then he would turn off the light and quietly stand outside her bedroom for a few seconds, making sure she was asleep before going downstairs. He didn't have the luxury of falling apart. He had a daughter who believed he could fix anything. At Sterling Hart, Daniel was known for something different. He could fix things. Not machines. Not computers. People. Processes. Problems. When the company's logistics division had nearly collapsed 11 years earlier, Daniel had been a 32-year-old operations manager who was given 3 months to turn things around. Everyone expected him to fail. He didn't. He spent nights studying shipment patterns, visiting warehouses, interviewing drivers, and listening to employees who had stopped believing management cared. He discovered that the company wasn't losing money because of one enormous mistake. It was losing money because hundreds of small problems were being ignored. Late deliveries. Poor communication. Broken software. Burned-out workers. Unrealistic schedules. Unhappy customers. Daniel fixed them one by one. Within 2 years, the division became profitable. Within 5 years, it became the company's strongest division. By the time Daniel reached 40, Sterling and Hart's logistics operation generated nearly 40% of the company's annual revenue. People began calling it the Reed system. Daniel hated the name. He always said the system belonged to the people who built it with him. That was one reason employees trusted him. He remembered names. He knew whose child had been sick. He knew which warehouse supervisor had a wife recovering from surgery. He knew which driver was struggling with alcoholism. He knew which engineer was thinking about quitting. He never treated people like numbers. And that was exactly what made his relationship with Victoria Sterling so complicated. Victoria had founded Sterling and Hart alongside her late husband. She was brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, and deeply ambitious. Daniel respected her. For years, she respected him too. They weren't friends. They didn't have dinner together. They didn't exchange holiday gifts. But they understood each other. Victoria valued results. Daniel produced them. That was enough. Until Ethan came back. Ethan Sterling was Victoria's 29-year-old nephew. He had spent the previous 3 years working for a consulting firm in London. At least, that's what his resume said. Daniel had heard different stories. He heard Ethan had been fired from one company and quietly moved into another position through family connections. He heard he had never managed more than 12 people. He heard he had never operated a warehouse. He had never negotiated with a shipping company during a fuel crisis. He had never handled a customer threatening to terminate a $200 million contract. But he was Victoria's nephew. And that mattered. The first time Ethan walked into Daniel's department, he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Daniel's car. He looked around the operations floor and smiled. "This is bigger than I expected." Daniel looked up from his computer. "Welcome." Ethan glanced at him. "You're Daniel Reed?" "Yes. I've heard a lot about you." Daniel smiled politely. "Hopefully nothing too terrible." Ethan laughed. "No. Actually, my aunt speaks highly of you." Daniel nodded. That should have reassured him. It didn't. There was something in Ethan's expression. Not respect. Evaluation. As if Daniel weren't a colleague. As if he were an obstacle. For the next several weeks, Ethan attended meetings. He asked questions. He made suggestions. He criticized old procedures. Daniel welcomed most of it. He wasn't afraid of change. What bothered him was that Ethan spoke confidently about things he didn't understand. At one meeting, Ethan suggested reducing delivery staff by 15% to improve operational efficiency. Daniel looked at the data. That would save about $3 million annually. Ethan smiled. Exactly. But it would increase overtime by nearly $6 million. The room went quiet. Ethan frowned. Daniel turned the screen toward him. "These employees aren't excess capacity. They're what keeps us from missing our delivery windows." Ethan leaned back. "I'll review the numbers." Daniel nodded. "Please do." After the meeting, one of Daniel's senior managers approached him. "You know he's going to replace you, right?" Daniel looked at him. "Who?" "Ethan." Daniel sighed. "I don't know that." "You should." Daniel returned to his office. That evening, he picked Lily up from school. She climbed into the passenger seat carrying a drawing. "Dad." "Hey, kiddo. Look." She held up a picture. It showed a small house beside a huge tree. Under the tree stood 3 people holding hands. Daniel looked at it. "Who's the third person?" Lily hesitated. "Mom." Daniel's chest tightened. "She looks happy." "She is." Daniel smiled. "That's beautiful." Lily studied him. Are you happy? Daniel looked at the road. Sometimes. That's not an answer. He laughed softly. You're 10. And? And you're supposed to ask easier questions. Lily grinned. Then she leaned against the window. Are you worried about work? Daniel glanced at her. Why would you think that? You were quiet. I've been quiet for 11 years. Yeah, but this is different. Daniel smiled. Kids noticed everything. He reached over and squeezed her hand. I'll be okay. Lily looked at him seriously. You promise? Daniel nodded. I promise. It was the kind of promise parents made without realizing how dangerous it could be. Because sometimes you don't know what you'll have to survive in order to keep it. 3 months later, Victoria called Daniel into her office. He knew immediately that something was wrong. Victoria's office overlooked the city. She was standing beside the window when he entered. Close the door. Daniel did. Sit. He sat. Victoria remained standing. I've made a decision. Daniel waited. Effective Monday, Ethan will take over operational leadership of the logistics division. Daniel stared at her. For several seconds, he didn't speak. Victoria continued. You'll remain with the company as senior strategic advisor. Daniel's voice was calm. Reporting to whom? Victoria paused. Ethan. Daniel looked down at his hands. He thought about the warehouses. The employees. The systems he had built. The contracts he had negotiated. The nights he had spent working until midnight. He thought about all the people who had trusted him. Then he thought about Lily. He raised his eyes. Why? Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Because the company needs succession planning. I'm 43. I'm aware. Ethan has never run an operation this size. That's why he'll have you. Daniel almost laughed. So I'm training the person who's replacing me? Victoria's voice became sharper. Don't make this personal. Daniel stared at her. It became personal when you decided that 11 years of leadership could be transferred without a conversation. Victoria walked back to her desk. You're emotional. No. Daniel shook his head. I'm disappointed. Victoria crossed her arms. This isn't a negotiation. Daniel sat quietly. Victoria looked at him. You'll report to my nephew. That sentence landed harder than everything else. Not because Daniel didn't understand hierarchy. He did. But because he finally understood what she was saying. She didn't see him as a leader anymore. She saw him as a resource. A tool. Something useful enough to keep but no longer important enough to trust. Daniel slowly stood. All right. Victoria blinked. You understand? Yes. Good. Daniel reached the door. Then he stopped. He turned around. For what it's worth, Victoria, I hope Ethan succeeds. She gave a small nod. He will. Daniel smiled sadly. I hope you're right. He walked out. The next morning, Daniel arrived at work early. He opened his laptop. He looked at the photographs on his desk. One was of Lily at age 6. Another was a picture of the operations team celebrating after they won their biggest contract. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he opened a blank document. He typed. Resignation letter. He stopped. He thought about his mortgage. School expenses. Medical bills. The uncertainty. Then he remembered Lily's question. Are you happy? Daniel deleted the first sentence and started again. He wrote a short letter. No insults. No accusations. No dramatic speech. Just gratitude for the years he had spent at Sterling and Hart and a statement that he could no longer continue under the new arrangement. He printed it. Signed it. And walked into Victoria's office. She read it twice. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You're walking away from a senior executive position?" "Yes." "You have a child?" Daniel looked at her. "I do." "So think carefully." "I have." Victoria stared at him. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." "You could lose everything." Daniel nodded. "I might." She lowered the letter. "Then why?" Daniel took a breath. "Because I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking that being responsible means accepting disrespect." Victoria said nothing. Daniel walked out. He didn't know it then, but that was the last day Sterling and Hart's logistics division would operate normally. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later. A major client complained about late shipments. Then another. Then another. Ethan dismissed them. Temporary adjustment. Daniel had warned him during the transition. The scheduling software is built around experience-based exceptions. If you change the staffing model too quickly, the algorithm won't compensate for real-world conditions. Ethan had smiled. "You worry too much." Daniel nodded. "Maybe." Then he left. For the first time in 11 years, Daniel didn't have to care what happened inside Sterling and Hart. And that freedom felt strange. At first, he didn't know what to do with it. He spent more time with Lily. He made pancakes on Saturday mornings. He went to her school play. He helped with her science project. He started jogging. He even learned how to make the homemade pizza she liked. One evening, Lily looked at him across the kitchen. "You seem different." Daniel smiled. "Different good or different bad?" "Good." She took another bite. "You laugh more." Daniel paused. He hadn't noticed. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Daniel received an email from an old colleague. Her name was Maria Chen. She had worked with him at Sterling and Hart for 7 years. The email was short. "Daniel, can we talk?" They met at a small coffee shop. Maria looked exhausted. She had been promoted under Ethan. "I need advice." Daniel smiled. "You don't work for me anymore." "I know." "Then why ask me?" "Because you listen." Daniel looked down. "What happened?" Maria took a breath. "They changed the entire scheduling structure." Daniel's expression became serious. "Why?" "Cost cutting." "How bad?" She hesitated. "Bad." She explained that experienced supervisors were being removed. Delivery routes were being consolidated. Employees were being pressured to work longer hours. Several engineers had resigned. Daniel listened. He didn't offer to fix it. He couldn't. That chapter was over. But as Maria stood to leave, she said something that stayed with him. "They don't understand what you built." Daniel looked at her. "No." Maria shook her head. "They think you built a system." She paused. "You built a culture." Daniel said nothing. Maria left. 3 weeks later, Sterling and Hart lost its largest logistics client. The stock dropped 4%. Victoria held an emergency meeting. Ethan blamed external market conditions. The CFO blamed fuel prices. The operations team blamed staffing. Nobody said the real problem. They had removed the person who understood how all the pieces connected. Victoria called Daniel. He didn't answer. She called again. He still didn't answer. Finally, she left a voicemail. Daniel, we need to talk. He listened to it that night while making dinner. Lily was doing homework at the table. Who was that? Someone from work. Are you going back? Daniel looked at her. No. Why? Because sometimes you have to let people learn from their choices. Lily thought about that. Even if they hurt themselves. Especially then. She nodded. Then she returned to her homework. Daniel smiled. He thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 6 weeks later, the situation became a crisis. A software update caused shipment tracking failures across 3 major warehouses. Thousands of orders disappeared from the tracking system. Customers couldn't see where their products were. Drivers waited for instructions. Warehouses filled with delayed shipments. Employees worked around the clock. The company lost millions. Ethan called an emergency meeting. He demanded that the technology team fix everything within 24 hours. The chief engineer said it would take at least 5 days. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. Then work 5 days without sleeping. The engineer stared at him. You're going to lose half your team if you keep talking like that. Ethan stood. Then I'll hire another half. Nobody spoke. That evening, 3 senior engineers resigned. The next morning, Victoria finally understood. The problem wasn't one software failure. It was leadership. The system had been designed around people who knew how to communicate. Those people were leaving. And no spreadsheet could replace them. Victoria sat alone in her office. She looked at the old photograph on her desk. It showed her husband standing beside a younger Daniel at the opening of the company's second warehouse. Her husband had always trusted Daniel. Victoria remembered what he once told her. Daniel doesn't need authority to lead. Give him responsibility, and people will follow. She had forgotten that. Or perhaps she had remembered it and convinced herself it wasn't important. Her phone rang. It was the CFO. We need Daniel. Victoria closed her eyes. I know. Can you bring him back? Victoria looked out at the city. I don't know. But she knew where to find him. Daniel was at Lily's school that afternoon. He was volunteering at a career day. The children were supposed to interview parents about their jobs. One boy asked Daniel, "What do you do?" Daniel smiled. I used to manage a large team. Why don't you anymore? Daniel laughed. Because sometimes you need to know when it's time to move on. The teacher smiled. Then another child asked, Are you rich? The room erupted in laughter. Daniel shook his head. No. Then why did you have a big job? Daniel thought about it. Because a job isn't valuable because of the money. The teacher nodded. What makes it valuable? Daniel looked at the children. The people you help. That evening, Victoria arrived at Daniel's house. He opened the door and froze. Victoria? She stood on his porch. Without an assistant. Without security. Without the confidence she normally carried like armor. We need your help. Daniel looked behind her. No. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You haven't even heard me. I don't need to. You're angry. Yes. Then be angry. She swallowed. But people are losing their jobs. Daniel's expression changed. How many? 300 so far. He looked away. Victoria continued. Customers are leaving. How many? 4 major accounts. Daniel sighed. And Ethan? He's still running the division. Daniel looked back at her. Then I can't help. Victoria's voice softened. I was wrong. Those 4 words were harder for her than any apology she had ever given. Daniel stared at her. Victoria continued. I thought because Ethan was family, I owed him an opportunity. Daniel said nothing. I didn't realize I was taking that opportunity away from someone who had earned it. Daniel looked down. You didn't just take my position. I know. You took the stability of hundreds of people. Victoria nodded. I know. And now you want me to come back and fix it? Yes. Daniel shook his head. I can't. Victoria's eyes filled with frustration. Why? Because if I come back under the same conditions, nothing changes. What do you want? Daniel looked at her. I don't want my old job. Then what? I want authority to rebuild the division. Victoria hesitated. Full authority? Operational authority. And Ethan? He needs to step aside. Victoria stared at him. He's my nephew. Daniel nodded. And I'm not asking you to choose between us. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to choose between competence and pride. Silence filled the porch. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly. You haven't changed. Daniel smiled sadly. I have. How? I finally know that I don't need Sterling and Hart to prove who I am. Victoria looked at him. Then she nodded. Give me 48 hours. Daniel didn't promise anything. She left. The next morning, Ethan walked into Victoria's office. I heard you went to see Daniel. Victoria looked up. Yes. You can't bring him back. Why? Because he quit. Victoria stared at him. Do you understand why he quit? Ethan shrugged. He didn't like reporting to me. Victoria stood. No. Ethan frowned. He was threatened by me. No. He was arrogant. Victoria's voice became quiet. He was right. Ethan froze. Victoria walked toward the window. I promoted you because I believed you could grow into leadership. I can. You may. But not here. Ethan's face changed. You're firing me? I'm removing you from operations. You can't do that. I can. I'm family. Victoria looked at him. That was the problem. Ethan walked out furious. For the first time, Victoria understood the cost of confusing family loyalty with leadership. Daniel returned 3 days later. Not as an employee. As an independent executive consultant with a contract giving him operational control. His first meeting with the management team lasted 20 minutes. He didn't yell. He didn't blame Ethan. He didn't make speeches. He asked 3 questions. What do our customers need? What are our employees afraid of? And which problems are we pretending don't exist? Nobody answered at first. Then Maria spoke. Our people are exhausted. Another manager said. Customers don't trust our delivery estimates. A software engineer said. Management stopped listening. Daniel nodded. Good. Everyone looked at him. Good? Yes. He walked to the whiteboard. We know what's broken. He wrote 3 words. Trust. Communication. Accountability. We don't need another motivational speech, he said. We need to fix these. The rebuilding began. Daniel called every major client personally. He didn't make excuses. He said. We failed you. Some clients were surprised. One asked. Why should we trust you again? Daniel answered. You shouldn't. The client was silent. Daniel continued. Not yet. We'll earn it. That sentence became the foundation of the recovery. Within 2 weeks, service levels improved. Within a month, 2 clients returned. Within 3 months, the division stopped losing money. But something else was happening. Daniel was changing too. He realized that his old approach had not been perfect. He had spent years protecting the company. Sometimes he had protected it from uncomfortable truths. Sometimes he worked so hard that he expected everyone else to work just as hard. He had been a good leader. But he had also been exhausted. Now he began teaching other people to lead. He promoted Maria. He gave young managers real authority. He stopped answering emails at midnight. He went home at 6 whenever possible. And he kept one promise above all others. He never missed Lily's important moments. One evening, Lily had a school presentation. Daniel sat in the front row. She walked onto the stage. Her hands were shaking. Then she saw her father. She smiled. Afterward, she ran into his arms. "Did you see me?" Daniel laughed. "Every second." "You weren't working?" "No." She hugged him tighter. "I like this version of you." Daniel closed his eyes. "So do I." Months passed. Sterling and Hart recovered. The logistics division became profitable again. The company regained customer confidence. And Victoria changed too. She began visiting warehouses. She spoke to employees. She asked questions without assuming she already knew the answers. One afternoon, she found Daniel in the break room drinking coffee. "Can I sit?" Daniel smiled. "It's your company." Victoria sat. "I wanted to thank you." Daniel shrugged. "You don't owe me thanks." "I do." She looked at him. "I nearly destroyed the best thing my company had." Daniel looked down at his coffee. "You nearly destroyed it because you forgot why it was successful." Victoria nodded. "People." "Yes." She smiled. "You always said that." "I did. I didn't listen." Daniel smiled. "Most leaders don't listen until something breaks." Victoria laughed softly. "That sounds like something you would put on a wall." "I probably won't." "Why?" "Because people stop seeing words when you put them on walls." Victoria laughed. For the first time in years, the two of them felt like colleagues again. Not boss and employee. Not CEO and consultant. Just two people who had survived a difficult lesson. But the biggest surprise came a year later. Victoria called an all-company meeting. Employees gathered in the auditorium. Daniel sat near the back. He didn't know why he had been invited. Victoria walked onto the stage. She looked at the crowd. Then she said, "A year ago, I made one of the worst leadership decisions of my career." The room became silent. I replaced experience with entitlement. Several people looked toward Daniel. Victoria continued. I thought leadership was about having the authority to make decisions. She paused. I was wrong. She looked directly at Daniel. Leadership is about earning enough trust that people believe in the decision even when you're not in the room. The room erupted in applause. Daniel lowered his head. Victoria continued. And today, I'm announcing that Daniel Reed will become president of Sterling and Hart Operations. Daniel looked up. He was stunned. Victoria smiled. But this time, he won't report to my nephew. The room laughed. Daniel stood. He walked onto the stage. Victoria handed him the microphone. Daniel looked at the employees. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then he saw Maria. He saw the warehouse supervisors. The engineers. The drivers. The people who had stayed. The people who had left and returned. And he thought about Lily. He smiled. I used to think my job was to make sure nothing went wrong. He paused. I was wrong about that too. People listened. Things will go wrong. A few people nodded. Companies will make bad decisions. More nods. People will disappoint you. Daniel looked at Victoria. And sometimes, people you respect will hurt you. Victoria lowered her head slightly. But none of those things have to define the ending. The auditorium was completely silent. What defines the ending is what you do next. Daniel took a breath. If you lose a job, you haven't necessarily lost your worth. If someone doesn't recognize your contribution, that doesn't make it disappear. If someone underestimates you, you don't have to spend your life proving them wrong. You can simply keep becoming the person they were incapable of seeing. The applause began slowly. Then it grew. Daniel smiled. He thought about the day he had walked into Victoria's office. He remembered the words. You'll report to my nephew. He remembered how small he had felt. And then he remembered what happened after he walked away. He discovered that leaving wasn't failure. Sometimes leaving is how you make room for something better. After the meeting, Daniel went home. Lily was waiting at the kitchen table. How was your day? Daniel put his briefcase down. Pretty good. She looked at him suspiciously. You're smiling. I smile sometimes. Not like that. He laughed. What happened? Daniel sat beside her. I got promoted. Lily's eyes widened. Really? Really? Does that mean you're important? Daniel shook his head. No. She frowned. Then what's the promotion for? Daniel smiled. It means I have more responsibility. She thought about that. That's different. Very. She leaned against him. Are you happy? Daniel looked at his daughter. Then at the old photograph of her mother on the shelf. Then at the home he had almost lost himself trying to protect. Yes. This time, he didn't hesitate. Yes, I am. Lily smiled. Good. Daniel kissed the top of her head. Outside, the sun was setting. The city lights began to flicker on. And for the first time in many years, Daniel didn't feel like he was running toward something. He felt like he had arrived. But his story wasn't really about becoming president. It wasn't about proving Victoria wrong. It wasn't even about watching a powerful division collapse after he left. It was about something much simpler. Self-respect. Because sometimes, the hardest thing a person can do is walk away from a place that gives them money, status, and security because staying would cost them something more valuable. Their dignity. Their peace. Their time with the people they love. Daniel had once believed that success meant becoming indispensable. Then life taught him a painful lesson. If everything collapses when you leave, you didn't build a strong organization. You built dependency. Real leadership means building something that can survive without you. And real self-worth means knowing that you can survive without the place that once seemed impossible to leave. Years later, Lily would remember that period of her childhood. She wouldn't remember the stock price. She wouldn't remember the lost contracts. She wouldn't remember the corporate meetings. She would remember pancakes on Saturday mornings. Her father's voice at her school performances. The way he listened. The way he always came home. And one day, when she was old enough to understand everything, she asked him a question. Dad, were you scared when you quit? Daniel smiled. Yes. Then why did you do it? He looked at her. Because being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. He paused. It means you decide that something else matters more. Lily thought about that for a moment. What mattered more? Daniel smiled. You. And that was the truth. The biggest victory wasn't that Sterling and Hart eventually needed Daniel. It was that Daniel finally realized he didn't need Sterling and Hart. He had spent 11 years building a division. But in the months after leaving, he built something much more important. A life. A relationship with his daughter. A healthier version of himself. A leadership philosophy based on trust instead of fear. And a future that wasn't dependent on someone else's approval. So if you're watching this story because someone at work has underestimated you, remember Daniel. Maybe you've been passed over. Maybe someone less qualified received the opportunity you deserved. Maybe you've been told that you aren't important. Maybe you've spent years giving everything to a company, a relationship, or a dream, only to discover that the people benefiting from your sacrifice don't appreciate it. Don't let their blindness become your identity. You don't have to destroy anyone to prove your worth. You don't have to shout. You don't have to get revenge. Sometimes the strongest response is simply to step back, rebuild yourself, and become so strong that the rejection that once broke your heart becomes the event you later thank life for. And if you're in a position of leadership, remember Victoria. Never confuse loyalty with entitlement. Never give someone a position simply because they share your last name. Never assume the quietest person in the room has the least power. Sometimes the person who says the least knows the most. Sometimes the employee who never demands recognition is the person holding everything together. And sometimes, when that person finally walks away, you discover just how much they were carrying. Daniel didn't win because a company collapsed without him. He won because he learned that his value was never contained inside a job title. He won because he chose his daughter. He chose his dignity. He chose peace. And eventually, he chose to return, not because he needed the company, but because he could help rebuild it on better terms. That is the difference between desperation and purpose. And perhaps that's the lesson we all need. Don't spend your entire life trying to convince people of your value. Build. Learn. Love. Grow. Stand up when you need to. Walk away when you must. And if one day the people who underestimated you finally realize what they lost, don't waste your energy celebrating their regret. Be too busy living the life you almost sacrificed trying to earn their approval. Because the greatest comeback isn't making someone regret losing you. The greatest comeback is becoming someone who no longer needs them to regret it. And Daniel Reed? He never again allowed another person to decide how valuable he was. Not a CEO. Not a company. Not a title. Not a paycheck. He knew. And once you know your worth, you can lose almost anything without losing yourself. If this story touched you, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about resilience, second chances, and people who discover their strength when life pushes them to the edge. And remember this the next time someone makes you feel replaceable. You may be replaceable in a position. You may be replaceable in a company. You may even be replaced by someone with a better resume, a bigger title, or a more powerful last name. But nobody can replace the life you were meant to live. That part belongs only to you.